Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Dhena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. We're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 17. Mother Parvati curses Chitraketu. Text number? 30? Aviveka krita pumso hyarta bheda ivatmani gunadosha vikalpascha bhideva srajivat krita aviveka krita, done in ignorance, without mature consideration. Pumsa, of the living entity, he, indeed, artabheda, differentiation of value. Eva, like, atmani, in himself, gunadosha, of quality and fault, vikalpa, imagination, cha, and pit, difference, eva, certainly, sraji, in a garland, vat, like, kritaha, made. Translation: as one mistakenly considers a flower garland to be a snake, or experiences happiness and distress in a dream, so in the material world, by a lack of careful consideration, we differentiate between happiness and distress, considering one good and the other bad. Please repeat. As one mistakenly considers a flower garland, sorry, I'll break it up a little better for you. As one mistakenly considers a flower garland to be a snake, or experiences happiness and distress in a dream, so in the material world, by a lack of careful consideration, we differentiate between happiness and distress, considering one good and the other bad. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The happiness and distress of the material world of duality are both mistaken ideas. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antya 4, 176, it is said, Dvaite bhadra bhadra gyan shab manodharam, e bhalo, e mando, e shab brahm. The distinctions between happiness and distress in the material world of duality are simply mental concoctions, for the so-called happiness and distress are actually one and the same. They are like the happiness and distress in dreams. A sleeping man creates his happiness and distress by dreaming, although actually they have no existence. The other example given in this verse is that a flower garland is originally very nice, but by mistake, for want of mature knowledge, one may consider it a snake. In this connection, there is a statement by Prabodhananda Saraswati, Vishvam Purna Sukhayate. Everyone in this material world is distressed by miserable conditions. But Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati says that this world is full of happiness. How is this possible? He answers, Yat karunya kataksha vaibhavantam tam gaurameva stumaha. A devotee accepts the distress of this material world as happiness only due to the causeless mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. By his personal behavior, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu showed that he was never distressed but always happy in chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. One should follow in the footsteps of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and engage constantly in chanting the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Then he will never feel the distresses of the world of duality. In any condition of life, one will be happy if he chants the holy name of the Lord. In dreams, we sometimes enjoy eating a sweet rice and sometimes suffer as if one of our beloved family members had died. Because the same mind and body exist in the same material world of duality, when we are awake, the so-called happiness and distress of this world are no better than the false superficial happiness of dreams. The mind is the via medium in both dreams and wakefulness, and everything created by the mind in terms of sankalpa and vikalpa, acceptance and rejection, is called manudharma, or mental concoction. I saw a picture the other day of two children. Actually, it was an Olympic awards kind of stand where you have three spaces, one for the top winner, and the first place is on the highest level, and then there's two lower levels for second and third place. And the picture showed the first place winner. These were children, it's not the Olympics. But they were the first place winner was holding his medal, and he had a very disturbed and sour look on his face, and he was looking over at the third place winner, who had his hands in the air like this, holding a third place medal, in complete ecstasy that he had won a third place. And the first place was so disturbed, seemingly, that this other person was happy that he won a third, and now, why aren't I that happy? And it reminded me of how one's happiness is determined by the state of mind that how one identifies with the particular state of mind that is produced by the churning of the mind. When I was in kindergarten at the Burton State Fair, I won a 7th place for skipping. They had races at the Burton Fair. And I remember I tripped, but I came in 7th, which I think was second to last. But I was so happy that I won something. I had no idea that I was, and also ran. I was taking my ribbon around. I think my mother kept it until she died. It was, 7th place for skipping. But I had no idea. And so, one way or another, I identify with the state of my mind. And here, there's some very choice words used in the verse. Avivek krita. So, vivek means to consider something, to deliberate. Deliberate means you weigh both sides. It has the word libra in it, which means the scales, the pan scales, where you weigh both sides. One of the ideas, I wrecked something, okay. One of the ideas behind deliberation is that you consider the consequences of what happens. This is actually a definition, one of the explanations of what deliberation is. It means to consider very carefully what are the consequences of a particular action. And in the last verse of the 3rd chapter of the Gita, Krishna, after describing the hierarchy of the senses, above the senses of the mind, above the mind is the intellect, above the intellect is the soul, says, Evam buddhi param bhudva samstabhyatmanam jahi shatrum mahabaho kamarupam durashadam. And that is that one should use, he says, deliberate spiritual intelligence. This is called DSI. Deliberate spiritual intelligence to conquer the lower self by the higher self. This is vivek. One has to deliberate, has to consider very carefully, what is my situation, what is the lower self, what is the higher self. And in this choice of words, it's avivek, which means the opposite. It's not well considered. Or in other words, no consideration has been given to the difference between the lower self and the higher self. And then krita means that you went ahead and did it anyway. You didn't know what the consequences were going to be. You didn't inform yourself. You didn't investigate it, and then you acted. So now, what do you expect from your activity if you act in that way? And then avivek krita pumso. So pumso means the actor, or in this case, talking about the soul. So the soul is called pumso here. And the soul is responsible for his activities because he's known to be an agent for change, at least as far as we're concerned in our sampradaya. There are other philosophers who have other ideas. The karma mimamsas, as an example, think that the soul is not an agent. He's subject to karma, and that's it. And one has to simply perform Vedic rituals and chant the right mantras to adjust one's karma. But he doesn't consider the soul to be an agent the way we do. Especially, it's mentioned in the Vedanta Sutra by Srila Vyasadeva that the soul is an agent, and the logic he gives is that the Shastra is speaking to us and giving many different kinds of instructions and saying, if you do this, you'll get that. An example given there by Baladev Vidyabhushan, who comments on, gives his commentary on the Vedanta Sutra in our line, says that, quotes a verse from the Vedas that say, if you perform a certain kind of sacrifice, you'll go to heaven. So who's that speaking to? Well, Srila Vyasadeva says, speaking to you. And if it says you can get this by doing that, it means that you have the power of agency. You have some free will and you can exercise it in a certain way. And therefore, it's important to consider what is going to be the result of my activity. Now, what is deliberate spiritual intelligence? It is informed by Shastra. We find that the Shastra is the ultimate source of information. And if one takes in the information, for instance, from Bhagavad Gita, and listens to Krishna's instructions, then that such a person will have vivek, or proper discrimination. And if one acts according to that discrimination, then one won't make a mistake. One will be properly directed, unlike what is said here, avivek krita, acting without any discrimination. So then the words artha bheda, differentiation of value, are interesting as well. Artha means value, and bheda means to make a distinction between the two, to divide it up into different piles and say this one's good and that one's bad. This is something that, according to the perspective of this verse, is a product of someone who's avivek, because in the general categorization of energies, we find that there's higher energy and lower energy. There's the material energy and the spiritual energy, and then of course the living entity who's in between the two, or known as tatastha. And as far as the perspective of the Bhagavad Gita goes, the lower energy, or the material world, bhumirapo analovayu kamono bhudir evacha ahankara ityame bina prakritir ashtada, naming the different categories of material energy, is all inferior energy. And then there's a superior energy that he mentions in the next verse. Aparayam itastwanyam prakritim vidime param jiva bhutam mahabaho yayedam daryate jagat. And the living entity is ensconced in this lower energy. And so, considering these two categories, anything you differentiate in the material energy as being good or bad is a mistake, because it's all bad in consideration of our interaction with it. Because asango hyayam purushaha, ultimately the living entity has no business here. In fact, Prabhupada mentions in the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that the human form of life is an opportunity for the living entity who's mistakenly identifying with the lower material energy to wind up his business here. Okay, shut it down. You have to give a little time to wind it up. Divest yourself of your assets, and stop doing that. And this is something that Krishna mentions, that the material energy is categorically bad. In the Gita, he says, from the highest planet down to the lowest, all the places of misery. So that's not very good. That's not something that the soul can benefit from. So this idea of a good and bad, this is known as the manodharma, and Prabhupada mentions it, the artha bheda, the differentiation of value, specifically when we're talking about the material nature. This is a kind of manodharma, the dharma of the mind, and it's a speculative process. So we see all the time how people consider something to be valuable or not valuable according to the trends that go on. And then the trend changes, and then it's no longer fashionable, and people don't consider it very well anymore. And this is something that a transcendentalist is very much aware of, that the material world is constantly changing, and that there are things that seem to be favorable and unfavorable. Shubha shubha paleriva mukshashe karma bandhanai sanyasya karma yukta ma vimukto mam upaishyasi. Probably blew the third line on that, but anyway, Krishna says shubha ashubha. What is, for a transcendentalist, what's auspicious or inauspicious, it's not a consideration, because it's all the material energy. It has nothing to do with the soul. So one must train the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, by constantly being in contact with the instructions of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, and seeing through various modes, seeing through various means, how the mind is only speculating about what's happy and what's happy or distressful in the material world. And when one rises beyond that, one's, Krishna says, known to be a person of steady intelligence. Prajahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan atmanyeva manatushta stita pragnasta dochate. That person is called steady, who prajahati yada kaman, gives up the idea of what Prabhupada calls unnecessary necessities. And so prajahati gives up yada kaman, all forms of desire that relate to the lower energy. Sarvan partha manogatan, because the mind goes after it. Manogatan means the mind's always running, and Prabhupada describes it as a factory that's constantly producing ideas about happiness in the material world. So a person who's categorically risen above identifying with those desires, then is known to be on a steady level of intelligence. So one should go on living like that through deliberate spiritual intelligence. Krishna says in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Shruti Pratyaksha Aniyam. What is Shruti Pratyaksham? What is that verse? Shruti Pratyaksham Aniyam. He says you should use Shruti Pratyaksha Aniyam Anuman and Aitiyam. Anumanam Chatushpadam. That you should use direct experience, you should hear from the Shastra, you should also use logic, and also traditional wisdom to understand vikalpat savirajite, that the material world is not a substantial place, and therefore you should become detached from it. Vikalpat savirajite. And in the way of traditional wisdom, there's a story of a man who gets on a train. And when he gets on the train, he notices that more and more people are getting on, and a very attractive woman comes into the train compartment where he is. And he looks at her and thinks, oh, she's very beautiful. And then the train gets more and more crowded. The woman's moving closer towards him by force of circumstances. And then they go into a tunnel, and the electricity, the lights in the train that's moving along quite quickly goes out. And it's jostling the people as the train moves, and now the lights are out, and by force of circumstance, again, he feels somebody touching his hand, and he thinks, oh, it's that woman. And then he thinks, well, maybe she likes me. I mean, she could have moved that way or this way, but actually, now I think she's touching my hand, and well, we might end up together, and probably we'll be married. And what do my parents think? I mean, she's really beautiful. I mean, they always said I was a loser, but now, she'll come home with me, and then we're going to get a house. I know what it's going to look like too. I'm going to work really hard to make her happy, and then I'll show her off everywhere, and everyone will think, oh, this person is just, he always thought he'd never amount to anything, but actually, look how great he is. And we're going to have kids. They're to probably go to an Ivy League school. So all this is going through his mind as they're plummeting through the tunnel in the darkness, and then they burst out into the light. And he looks over, and is a decrepit old man touching his hand, and he jumps back and he recoils. And in a second, all of the machinations are gone. Everything he thought was going to be his reality now, it bursts, and there's nothing left. And in a similar way, in this purport, Srila Prabhupada is describing how one may mistake a flower garland for a snake and jump, especially if you're bathing in the Ganga, and then you feel something wrap around your leg, and you say, everyone look, what's wrong? Krishnadas, what happened? And look over, pull it out, and it's a garland. And it was, everyone's laughing. Like, you thought that was, but that's what everyone does. I mistake the body to be the self, and I mistake whatever is coming through my mind to be my reality. That's my life situation coming before my eyes, and I identify with it. And I think I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a cat, I'm a dog. And from one birth after another, I fall for the same scam again and again. So this is the advice of the Shastra, to give very deliberate consideration to who we are. Who am I? And what is my real position? And then in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions how those who follow Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who has prescribed the means to stay in contact with the transcendental realm and actually execute this deliberate spiritual intelligence by constantly chanting Hare Krishna. If one stays in contact with the sound vibration of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, then one naturally rises above one's mistaken identity, and is able to rise above the movements of the mind and not identify with it. This is the power of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. That's why it's called mantra. It delivers you from the mind. And furthermore, those who are devotees of Lord Chaitanya, like Prabodhananda Saraswati, see the whole material world as a place of joy. Why is that? Because it's all engageable in Krishna's service. The devotees can't believe their good fortune that they're here in New York City, for instance, as they look out and say, Lord Chaitanya compressed everything into one little place. It's a microcosm of the whole world, and he made it so easy. I can just walk out the door and there's people everywhere to tell about Krishna and to chant Hare Krishna. We don't have to go very far. We just go out, we can have Harinam, distribute books, and all these are the ways in which the devotees are excited because they see that the material world is a facility for spreading Krishna consciousness, and they don't see anything separate from Krishna. They see the material energy as Krishna's arrangement, and also my being involved in it as Krishna's arrangement so that I can have some service. And the ultimate means of rising above the changing mind and achieving one's true identity is by remembering and enacting the spirit of the verse from Bhagavad Gita that Krishna says in 1866. Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam braja aham tvam sarva papibhyo mokshayishami masucha. Use your minute independence, whatever intelligence you can muster, to just surrender unto me, and then you won't have to worry about anything else. And this is the ultimate instruction Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita, is to just surrender everything to me. And if one does that, then one immediately regains one's spiritual intelligence. As Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, Jeev Krishna das e bishwas, korletor or dukho nai. If you just have this one intention to surrender to Krishna and to consider that I'm a servant of Krishna, then you won't have this conundrum of having contend with the lower energy. You'll be free from that, the dukh, or the misery of the material world. And now we have only a few minutes for a few points. Yes, Prabhu.
Thank you for your wonderful class. My question is that when we're analyzing the material world, especially when we're dealing with our attraction to it, then we'll say, this is all Artha-Veda due to Abhiveka, I'm ignorant, I'm attracted. But when we're analyzing what we should do in terms of our behavior, it seems that we have to give a lot of credence to piety and impiety, which is also part of material energy. And otherwise, if we're like just in transcendental consciousness and don't give consideration to piety and piety, then you can have a very dangerous situation. It seems that some people may find, or sometimes I hear people find that problematic, like our total focus on transcendence. And where's our moral, like our sort of sense of moral theology, because it's all part of the material world, and that's really, in one sense, just monodharma. So how do we respond to something like this?
As you've mentioned, there's a way to interact with the material world so that we don't become further implicated. And that will be fueled or inspired by the transcendental practice that we do. We'll have the perspective to be able to do that properly. For instance, in the 7th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, when Prahlad Maharaj is describing the Varnashrama system, and he talks about the Grahastha ashrama, he says that a Grahastha should internally be detached, but externally be very enthusiastic to take care of family members. Because for instance, if one expresses renunciation to one's family in the Grahastha ashram, then the family will become discouraged because they'll think, well, we love you, Dad. And it's like, I'm not your dad, So there's nothing impractical about the Srimad Bhagavatam. It says that we should understand that we have this dual existence. This is part of Vivek, is understand that I have the two ways that I have to conduct myself. One is on the position of the material world and how I've come into it and how I fit with it, and that has to be done with finesse. And so on the other side, one has to also execute one's transcendental duties so that one can distinguish between one and the other. So both fit together, and it's a really good point. It's something that beginners, or a whole movement of beginners, can miss. And in the early days of Krishna consciousness, I think there was a way in which we overly expressed the idea of renunciation as the ultimate goal of bhakti. And then there was kind of a backlash from that because it wasn't performed. It was performed artificially. Prabhupada says anything done artificially won't be successful. So this is mentioned here. The word mature comes in the purport. This maturity is something that's very valuable. It takes a little adjustment. How to be engaged in the transcendental system and also stay integrated. It must be an integrated process and be able to integrate with the rest of the world. How to do those two things at the same time, that's maturity. And it sometimes requires making a few mistakes in order to readjust and find out how to actually do that. So for instance, just thinking of myself, because when I left home as a brahmachari, and my parents saved some of the letters I sent them, and I'm sure a lot of, and they were overly stressing, renunciation and my non-relationship with them and so forth. And then later on, after 8 years of not going home, and then going back and seeing my parents, over time I found an integrated way to deal with them, and actually there was great benefit for both of us. But that took a little adjustment. And of course, utsahan mai, in the beginning of any kind of discipline, you think, I got this, I know what it is. It's one thing. I'm going to do it. But over time, one realizes it's nuanced. And, you have to be able to orchestrate the different kinds of energies and so forth. Navina Prabhu.
I really like this part in the purport. Hare Krishna, thank you for where the Prophet says we should follow in the footsteps of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and engage constantly in chanting the Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. Then he will never feel the distress of duality. In any condition of life, one will be happy to chant the holy name of the Lord.
Good way to end.
Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, hey, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman.